Well, hello there. This is going to be continuing my series on going through the lore books that have been released by Once Lost Games for their game The Wayward Realms, and we're going to be covering A Midwife's Tale by, and I'm going to mispronounce this, Brinzine Ampia, first part, and then there's also included in this short story the second part and third part. I am unfortunately not going to be covering this entire story because it is an extremely long one, because a lot longer than the prior two, and so I'm not going to be doing that. So if you do want to read the story for yourself so you can get any context that you may think I'm lacking, it will be in the description down below. So let's get on with it. So for anyone who's new here, and also just for a quick reminder on the criteria I'm going to be used on why this is good or why this is bad. The first one is how relevant is it to the world, and the second one is what does it add to the world, what does it give to the world, and the third one is far more subjective matter, which is it good. And as for the first part, how relevant it is extremely relevant, similar to the previous one where we got a lot of information on the dwarves and the dueling and overall culture of the dwarves as well. We get a lot of information about the Inquisition, these guys in golden armor over here, and these two children are part of a race, I believe. I'm not necessarily sure on the specific term. I tried to look it up. I wasn't really being given a lot of information. I believe they're called godlings, which are creatures that can be born from any race, no matter who they are, and at random times. There's no like rhyme or reason for why they appear. It's not if you're too sick, or if you're too noble, or if you're if you're spiritually certain or unspiritually certain. It doesn't really matter on that regard. And so those are the first three direct things that we get. And as the player who is going to go into this game, this is a lot of information, and it gives a very clear understanding on what these topics are. In this one, it gives the Inquisition and says, hey, the Inquisition, they're in how most Inquisitions are, but how they do their Inquisitioning, I guess, is that they use a sort of form of eugenics, because they obviously don't like these godlings infesting humanity and whatnot, and so they want to eradicate them through a sort of biological means, not really a spiritual or a magical means, which is definitely an important piece of information in regarding of how to characterize them. And additionally, what this also gives us is gods, not necessarily as a direct thing, but more as an indirect thing. And if I may be able to find it, right here. So the first-person perspective character who's retelling this is this lady, a midwife, obviously, and she is the priestess of Aes. And from what we get from the entire story, we get the understanding that the god is a sun god, and that they value, typical sun god aspects: truth, justice, righteousness, and whatnot. But also we get a secondary god, which is also important to know, and this god is called Umbra, if I'm able to find the actual name of it. Umbria. Apologies for the mispronunciation. And she is also not the exact opposite, but they are sort of dualistic to each other. Again, this is very important information for the player to know, because when we actually go into the game and we see this book before we meet either of these deities, or if it's a new player who hasn't played the game and read this on their website, they'll get an understanding like, okay, so there's multiple gods in this world, and it seems like there's a dualistic god, or at least that there is a not that they're exact opposites, but that they're different sides of it. We don't necessarily know a lot of information, and there can be a lot of theorizing on who they are. Obviously, there is other information out there already that can give us more confirmation on the gods of the setting, but at the current moment, if you read this story, you do get more information on how the gods work. And the other information that you can get from this one is where these children go to, which is, and I'm going to mispronounce this so severely, it is a near, and if I may be able to find it, oh gosh, it is a old Celtic word. I believe that's the inspiration from when I googled this up. It brought me up Celtic inspirations, and also near, because they didn't go to this place, they went to a place near this, and the leader of these place, of this fey creatures, are called Queen Myriad, which is also a reference to a phase story. And yeah, there's also important information for the player to know getting into this, because then we get, okay, so here's some geography, here's some important player characters, and here are factions and how they interact with each other. And I gotta say, the amount of relevance to the actual game itself is quite staggering compared to the first story. And obviously the first story wasn't meant to be taken in a, this is all relevant to the game and you'll see every single thing, but more as a, just a good story to, as a primer to get into this setting, more of the feelings and vibes of this rather than the actual content that this world can have. But I like this one a lot more because of the more relevance to it. And yeah, and as for additions to the world overall, it is, again, as I said before, quite vast. And to speak a bit more about the Inquisition themselves, because they're going to be a major player within the game, the Inquisition and their armor style is quite emblematic of sun imagery, which is also a very good contrast for what they do in the actual game as well. They're not necessarily holy people, but they are trying to dress themselves up as holy people, as hypocrites, and it gives us a nice contrast to it. It's always nice to see in games when they portray the villains as sort of characters that think they're good, but rather their actions tell otherwise. And the Inquisition embody this quite well, especially because on how the Wayward Realms wants you to not empathize, but understand the villains that you're going to be facing, or join. I'm not necessarily sure if you're going to be able to join the Inquisition. I can't remember from the interviews if that was implied or stated, but interact with them, and this story does a really good job at characterizing them. And as for, is this just a good story? I think it is a really good story. Compared to the previous two, it is going into an upwards trend of good stories. And while there are some issues you may have, such as it's a slow start, the beginning portion is mostly covering the establishment of the two children, the maid and the Inquisition. The rest of it uses that setup really well to get some good payoffs, and just reading it makes it feel like it's not only just a believable story, but also it's a story that feels like there's a lot of meaning behind it as well, both implicit and explicit. And yeah, I think this is a good trend towards it, and if the writing here is reflective of the game, I think it is in all honesty quite good hands. So I hope you enjoyed this much shorter one. It is a far shorter one, especially because I didn't have to read. If you don't want me to read in future ones, I definitely won't do that. I just do it because I believe it is nice to do it for people who engage more with listening to something rather than reading something. But if you do want to read it, it is down in the description below. So yeah, thank you for watching.